New polls continue to show, speaking of the White House, Hillary Clinton with a decent post-convention bump now. A new NBC News poll gives her an 8% advantage over Donald Trump.
But how much should we be reading into the polls with 3 full months of the campaign left to go? We're getting some insight on that from the man who leads the Ipsos polling group right here in D.C., Cliff Young. He's with us here in the loft. Ipsos recently got high marks for its polling from the well-regarded site 538.com. So thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us this morning.
Well, thank you. I'm excited.
You get polling data literally every day. The last poll that you guys put out was last week, and we've seen Hillary Clinton have some type of resurgence over the last couple of days. Is it fair to say we might see the same with what you're polling now?
Yeah, I think we're going to see her tick up even more, not just with our polling, but the polling in general. Both Trump and Clinton had convention bumps. Historically speaking, the polls improve about 5% for the respective candidates. This year, Donald Trump improved 3, Hillary probably 6, and net of all that, she'll probably be up between 5 and 8%.
So my question is, though, I mean, I know you're a polling person, but do the polls really matter? Are they really getting the pulse? Because I've heard a lot of conversations out there that people are afraid to be honest when asked about the polls, and what they're telling you and what they're really going to do when they go there and vote and no one sees them could be 2 different things.
Yeah, of course. The closer you are to an election, the more accurate the polls. But they are indicative of what's going on at the time. So very specifically, who won the convention cycle? If I were to give a grade, Hillary did better than Trump. And the question is why. And the polling says that. And let me tell you why. He had a high bar. He's an outsider candidate. He's an anti-establishment candidate. And he had to really go in there to the convention and rally the troops. He went into convention with a 10-point enthusiasm gap compared to Romney in 2012. And he didn't do it. He didn't do a good job. He had a lot of confusion around the convention. Then you had sort of the post-Khan family issue, right? He didn't energize the base like he should have. Now, that doesn't mean he won't in the future. That doesn't mean that polls won't change, but they're indicative right now of the relative performance of the two.
When you poll, how much of an effort is there to have it as equally balanced as it can be as far as people who declare their political party? For example, your current poll right now shows Hillary with a 5% lead, but you also had more declared Democrats in the poll than you did Republicans. So do you try to make it a balanced playing field?
Yeah, we try to make it representative of the general population. And so there are more voters identify as Democrat than Republican, generally speaking. We try to make sure our poll reflects that. All pollsters try to make sure their polls reflect that. And I think we do a pretty good job, as does the market.
How much do you think polls in and of themselves affect how people think? So, if you see a poll and all of a sudden now Hillary's ahead, does that in and of itself energize Trump supporters?
No, usually polls are like one piece of information in the atmospherics that are going on, and obviously they're part and parcel of that information that the voters taking in. But there's been a lot of scientific studies that have shown that really, net of everything, they have very little impact. Now, they do have an impact at an elite level. So funders will look at polls. Potential candidates will look at polls to decide whether to enter or not a race.
Right.
But the general population, writ large, probably very little impact.
Here's a wild card, Cliff, in this particular race, and that is the non-major party candidates. And I want to particularly, in this case, talk about Gary Johnson, because according to your polling data, he's really starting to grab some votes now, particularly from Republicans and in many ways independents. Because your latest poll, and I'll throw a couple numbers out here, among independents, you have 19% say they would vote for Donald Trump, 18% for Gary Johnson, just 1 percentage point behind. How much of an impact could that third-party candidate have?
Yeah, historically in the United States, third parties have had very little impact. We have Roch Perot. That was a big deal in the 90s, right? But for the most part, they carve off a couple percent. This electoral cycle is different. When you take and look at elections around the world, and we do that, most elections are really slam dunks. We can predict them pretty easily, about 85%. 15% are disruptive. Those 15% typically have some sort of outsider anti-establishment candidate. The population is surly. They believe the system is rigged against people like them. They don't have much optimism about the future. That's what's happening in the U.S. In that sort of context, outsiders and third parties have higher preference than usual. So indeed, we believe that the third parties will do pretty well, third-party candidates will do pretty well as a protest vote.
Let me ask this real quickly, because I know that you said that, polls are indicative of how people feel right now, and we have a ways to go. So this is me watching the Daytona 500. I don't need to watch all 500 laps. Let me know when it's the last 2 laps, and then I'll see who the winner is. So how far out before the election do I really need to start looking at these polls?
Yeah, well, they're indicative, right? I mean, the fact that Trump is 5 points down and Hillary is up, that says something about the relative performance. But they become very accurate about 2 weeks out.
2 weeks out.
That's when they become sort of solid and firm. And we start to feel really sort of bullish about our predictions.
All right, your next major poll will be released on Thursday. We're 2 days away. Can you give us any hint as to what we might expect?
I think we're going to see what the market's showing, that Hillary had a very good week.
All right. Cliff Young is the president of Ipsos U.S. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you so much.
Talking polling data.
Yeah, very
7:36 right now. Also talking